Welcome to Healthy University, where we'll discuss issues and subjects on how you can live a healthier and more productive life. And now, here's your host for Healthy University, Alan Eisenberg.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Healthy You. This is your host, Alan Eisenberg, and it's just about school time here, so kids are starting to go back to school. I always get a little anxious about that just because I know I'm going to start reading about bullying more actively. But you know, today is going to be a great show, and I just know it. It's just, I always think about it. When Steve Harvey comes out on Family Feud, he always like, this is going to be a great show. I'm like, how do you know it's going to be a great show? It hasn't happened yet. But I've got a great guest today because I think we're going to be on the same wavelength in a lot of what we talk about. My guest today is Gabe Howard. He's an award-winning writer, mental health advocate, and sought-after speaker. He's the host of the Psych Central Show podcast and a regular contributor to Psych Central, Bipolar Magazine, and other online journals. He lives in Columbus, Ohio, with his wife, Kendall. He can be found online at gabehoward.com. So welcome to the show, Gabe.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'm so glad you're on. I'm a big fan of Psych Central, and it just happened to be that you wrote an article about bullying called "Bullying Isn't Child's Play" on Psych Central, and I get all the bullying information, so I found you, and then I started doing some research about you, and you're a fascinating gentleman. So first of all, what led you to write that article and the points that you were making in it?
Well, there's a couple of things that made me write the article. The first is it's back to school time. I actually smiled a little bit when you said, hey, it's back to school, so there's going to be more stuff in the media about bullying and its effects, et cetera. And that is why I wrote about it. It's back to school, and it popped up on the editorial calendar. Hey, it's back to school time. I have a history with bullying. I like to speak out about it and, talk about the lingering effects, et cetera. And being a mental health writer, I thought I'd really like to talk about, I was bullied as a child. I had untreated mental illness as a child. Now that I'm 40, which one hurt me more or has more lingering trauma? And I was surprised by the answer, but it was bullying for anybody. I know I just gave away the end. There's no reason to read the article now. But I thought that was an interesting thing because, most people would believe, mental illness is way worse than bullying. And in actuality, it certainly can be, but in my case, probably because I've been treated, it wasn't worse.
And I think also you bring to light something, and I know you make it very clear, but you have bipolar mental health issues, right? So that's so bipolar disorder, and I have friends with bipolar disorder, and I definitely have anxiety disorder, so that was my thing. But what's interesting about, I think, people like you and I, and I'm not trying to make a generalization about everybody in the world, but there's a sensitivity that comes with both bipolar, having high emotion, low emotion, and what I had, which is I'm highly sensitive. So easily affected is what it comes down to. And whether that effect is to bring you down or to bring, or to make it linger in your head, whatever's causing that to happen is a part of what my discovery was, and I'm sure in your discovery. So the bullying was worse because for me, I was highly sensitive. And maybe the bullying was worse for you because of the bipolar. It's just kind of like one of the things we don't do as children is we really don't know ourselves yet. We don't know these things quite yet. And then when we can look back and go, well, why was I that way? And then you start to realize, that's what it was. Did you ever have one of those aha moments like that?
I had a few along the way. When I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I read the description of the diagnosis and I was like, wow, you've just described my entire life.
Yeah.
So I mean that was really big for me because I didn't know my personality had a name. I just thought I was Gabe, and it turns out that my personality was a medical diagnosis. And I'm joking, of course. There's lots of facets of my personality that have nothing to do with bipolar disorder, but there was a lot of things that did, and that was frankly, like you said, I say scary or shocking or startling, but yeah, huge aha moment to think that I thought I was the only one. I thought that everything that I felt, everything that I did, everything that was happening was just my personality, and I just needed to suck it up and be a better person. And to find out that there was actually a disease process going on, that some of these things were out of my control, meaning I needed, therapy, medical intervention, I needed coping skills, I needed help.
Yeah.
Was just, I didn't know. I thought I could just will myself to be better. And the people around me thought that I could will myself to be better. So we were just all disappointed in each other. It was quite a learning experience.
Yeah.
So yeah, big eye opener.
I have great stories of and I don't know why. I don't know why I knew this, but as I got older, and turned into a teenager, I was just angry at the world. Just I had all these really weird feelings, and my mother would ask me, "Why are you acting this way?" And I said, "I don't know. It's got something to do with the bullying that happened to me when I was young." And she's like, "No, it doesn't. No, there's no way." And I'm like, yeah, "I don't know. That sticks in my craw every time. Every time I'm thinking about something, that comes back." And she's like, "That's impossible." Well, you know what today's studies tell us. So I knew something at 13 that they didn't figure out until 2013. But I always find that fascinating, and it's part of what I really like about what you're doing, which is we're opening that door. I'm not crazy. You're not crazy. I thought I was crazy, right? I'm sure you had that experience too. Like at some point you're like, I must be crazy. And so I'm willing to talk about these mental health issues that I had, and for you it's bipolar disorder. So given this, this sharing that we're doing, can you share with us how it affects you, and how did you get to the diagnosis point?
So obviously I had a lot of issues. I don't think I need to describe to the audience how somebody living with untreated bipolar disorder is probably, to put it mildly, a train wreck. So we'll just say that I was a train wreck, and I thought about suicide constantly. I made all kinds of just very sketchy and dangerous decisions. I had issues with, of course, depression, which, I was suicidal, and somehow I had convinced myself that wanting to kill myself was normal. This was just something that other people thought about as well. So that's really what it was. It was just a mess.
Yeah.
My entire life was just a complete and utter mess, but I guess I didn't realize it. So living with untreated bipolar disorder, it convinces you that your mess is either A, normal, or B, going away soon.
Yeah.
And that's really where I was until somebody noticed these things. We'll just go with that. They noticed all of the things that made me a train wreck, but they recognized them not as Gabe being bad. They recognize them as symptoms of a larger problem. So once somebody saw them as symptoms rather than bad behavior, they took me to a doctor. And there's a whole long and involved story that I love to tell, and I'll try to tell it really, really quickly. But basically, a woman who I was casually dating at the time, she recognized the suicidality in me. She realized that I was planning on I always want to say planning on dying by suicide, but in that moment I was planning on committing suicide. Let's call it what it is. And she asked me, she said, "Are you planning on killing yourself?" Well, I had no reason to lie, so I said yes. Again, why would I lie? I thought everybody was thinking about this. Nobody had ever asked before, but I still thought it was a reasonable question. And she said, "Oh my, we have to get you to a hospital." And I said, "Why would I go to a hospital? I'm not sick. Sick people go to hospitals." And we, of course, bickered back and forth for a minute, and she said, okay, I'll tell you what. Let's get in the car, we'll go to the emergency room, and we'll ask the intake specialist if this is where you need to be. And if it's not where you need to be, then she'll set us straight, and you'll win the bet. You'll be right. You will win the argument. And I jokingly say now that apparently even in my paranoid, delusional, depressed, and suicidal state, I still wanted to win the argument. So we hopped in the car and we went to the emergency room, and she described the symptoms to the intake specialist, and obviously they took it very, very seriously. And I was a resident of a psychiatric ward for 3 days. I was committed to the hospital. That's where I got my diagnosis, and it was an incredibly humbling, eye-opening, and life-changing 3 days. Not because anything changed. I didn't come out better. I just knew what was going on. And then from there, it took, another 4 years to reach what we refer to as recovery in the mental health community. And it was just such an incredibly difficult journey and fight. But obviously now that I have done it, it was so worth it.
Yeah.
While it was happening, it was painful.
Yeah.
It was very painful.
And I think that's the thing that's hardest, is that beginning. That point of realization is only the beginning. And as I like to tell people with my journey, when am I going to be all better? When it all ends, when life's over, and then I'll be all better. But I don't think about it in terms of that anymore. I live with it, and I don't set expectations around it. And I find that to be helpful. I don't know if you find the same thing, because when you wrote your article, one of the things that stuck out with me is that you said you expect bipolar disorder to want to hurt you, but not necessarily on the bullying. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the idea that what you have, you expect to hurt you?
Precautions. That's really the best way that I can put it. I use several analogies, and I love analogies, perhaps to a fault. But one of the examples that I use is that a knife. We expect knives to hurt us, and that's why we're so cautious with them. We don't grab a knife by the blade. We make sure to hold the handle. We make sure that we're paying attention. We move our hands away from knives. But make no mistake, we expect knives to cut. We just take precautions to make sure that even though the knife is willing to cut us, it doesn't. And it doesn't because we know how to handle the knife. If we just decided to, go running around with knives, grab them the wrong way, slash them at people, let our children play with knives, etc., knives would hurt a lot more people. So it's not that knives aren't dangerous. It's that we're capable and smart, and we limit our ability to be hurt by knives because we're smarter than knives. Bipolar disorder is really the same way in many, many ways. There are things that we can do to limit how much damage bipolar can do to us. Now, unfortunately, it's not as clean with a knife because I have the option not to use any knife. I can just get rid of knives, never use knives again. Whereas, unfortunately, I don't have the option to get rid of bipolar. There's no cure for it. There's no cure for it. But there are things that I can do to lessen its effects. And those are the things that I have done. And they're different for everybody. I wish people always ask, what are they? Tell me what they are. Well, they're different for everybody, but you learn them in therapy. You go to a psychiatrist. Medications are available to help. You have to accurately report your symptoms to the psychiatrist to get on the right meds. You have to try many different types of meds. You have to tolerate certain side effects. You have to realize your own limitations, and on and on and on and on. And it's one of the reasons it took 4 years. Yeah. But once I figured them all out, well, I'm still probably going to spend about 10% of my life dealing with this illness, but that means the other 90% is mine.
Yeah, and isn't that great? It's the same thing that I feel like. It's like I'll wake up and I'll know, I'm having a bad day, or it's gonna, it's just starting wrong, but I know it, now versus not knowing it, and so I know how to handle it, and I think that's a big part. And one of the interesting things that you were just saying, I kind of want to go back to your stay when you were committed. My good friend, and he was on the show in one of my early episodes, also has bipolar. And it was interesting. He joined the Navy, and he went to his commanding officer, and he's like, I feel a certain way, blah, blah, blah. And the commanding officer said, "Well, go over to this building." And he goes over to the building, and it's the psychiatric ward. And they just took him and they brought him in. And of course, it's the Navy, so he doesn't even know what's going on. But that guy knew, he's got something serious going on. And it's that same thing where, he wasn't aware. He just thought, wow, I'm just not feeling right. I feel kind of suicidal or whatever it was that struck a chord. And he got lucky because I think, that he had a commanding officer that helped him. But he also talked about some of the good and the bad of being committed for a brief time. Did you have good and bad experiences as well? Like, were there things that you say, okay, this was good, but I wish I hadn't experienced this?
Yeah. The hospitalization in general. Let's remove psychiatric hospitalization. Let's just talk about hospitalization. Hospitalization in general is filled with goods and bads. Good, you're getting help for your illness. Bad, your butt hangs out the back of the gown. Good, people are helping to take care of you. Bad, hospital food stinks. So there's, nobody wants to stay at the hospital. Let's just be honest. Hospitals kind of suck. Let's just go with that. It's not a place that anybody goes for fun. So let's talk about the difference between a hospital stay and a psychiatric hospital stay. And the biggest one is that in a psychiatric hospital stay, the doors are locked.
Yeah.
You can't leave. The first thing that I want to say unequivocally is this is for the patient's protection. This is for my protection. Those doors needed to be locked to keep me safe. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't change how I feel about being a grown man incarcerated against my will behind locked doors and being told that I can't leave. I'm an American. I want to leave. It was absolutely the best decision. I'm glad that they did it. If I ever fall to that, if I ever need it again, I hope they do it the exact same way. But it's terrifying.
Yeah.
I hadn't been told I couldn't leave a room in, a better part of a decade, maybe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was very infantilizing. It was very confusing. It was very scary. Visiting hours, they had visiting hours. And they were very strict. So if I wanted to see somebody, they better have been available between 7 and 8 in the evening. They couldn't just stop by at 4 and sneak in because, even though there's visiting hours at the hospital, everybody has their wife or their mom or their sister or their bestie stay with them in that room. Yeah, they're very serious about these rules. So I couldn't have had somebody sit with me 24/7 if I wanted to. Right. And that's also scary because I was scared.
Yeah.
And this is the biggest thing that I tell people that I think a lot of people don't consider. See, everything else makes sense up until this point. Okay, the doors are locked for your protection. They can't let people come and go because they have to keep everybody safe. All right, we dig it. This all makes sense. But here's the big one that I think a lot of people don't think about. I fell prey to all of the exact same pop culture myths that everybody else did. I believed very strongly in the idea that all mentally ill people were, violent homicidal maniacs waiting to kill me. And now I'm locked in a building with them and I can't escape. So I was terrified because I didn't know what to expect. And I had been raised my entire life to believe that this was a scary place.
Well, one flew over the cuckoo's nest. Yeah, one flew over the cuckoo's nest. Did a lot of good for that.
Right. And
making us think that.
So it's fascinating that, now that I have been a resident of a psychiatric ward, I got to tell you, nothing like it is on TV. They're largely low energy, pretty boring places. Mm-hmm. But I was waiting for violence every second. I was so scared and so tense because I'm like, they're going to get me. And the they, of course, was me. I was the they in that sentence, but I didn't realize it at first.
Right.
And that was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying.
Well, there's no doubt. And I think on the good news side, obviously, 3-day stay pretty short, and you were able to get help. And I think that's what people have to understand is sometimes we just have to get help. And I tell people that. I'm like, don't be afraid, and don't think you can't. You mentioned it. There's a reason psychiatrists, psychologists, coaches, mental health experts are out there, because we need them. And whatever point we need them at is when we need them. We have to take a quick short break, but when we come back, I'd like to talk about how you made the turn to become a mental illness activist. So, Gabe, just stay with me for a minute during these commercials, and we'll be right back. Hi, and welcome back to Healthy You. This is Alan Eisenberg, and I'm here today with Gabe Howard, and we're talking about sort of our joint mental illnesses and how opening up about it, what the work that Gabe's doing on Psych Central, where he has his own podcast and writes for. And that's what I kind of wanted to talk about next. Although as I was reading your articles, you wrote one that I just wrote about the same thing, and it had always bothered me, and it was about bipolar anger. And I talk about, I have anticipatory anxiety a lot of the times if I'm driving anywhere strange. I don't like to drive to start with, and then if I'm driving somewhere strange, you're guaranteed that I'm going to start yelling. It's pretty much gonna happen because I'm so anxious and scared and all these things. What did you learn about this anger that comes out? I think that really is a part of mental illness, whether it was depression when I was depressed or anxious. I have this anger issue, and I know it.
I learned a lot about anger through, both in therapy and, of course, writing about it. And I write about it a fair amount because I really think that anger is a misinterpreted and disrespected emotion. Now, I always, everybody's like, he's an idiot. He's saying you're allowed to yell at people. That's not what I said. I said that anger has a place. Mm-hmm. Just like anything, we have to learn to control our emotions, and controlling our emotions is just part of being alive. For example, we don't show up at a funeral and start laughing. We understand that, laughter at a funeral is in general an inappropriate place to start laughing because, we're respectful. You can't start yelling at people, but you are allowed to be angry. And anger turns into things. Anger is an indicator. If somebody is treating me poorly, I hope that I get angry. Otherwise, I'm just docile and taking it. And you need a little bit of anger to be able to stand up for yourself and set a boundary or an expectation. And so what we really think of as anger, or what we really think of as bad anger, is actually just uncontrolled anger. Obviously, any emotion that goes so far that you can no longer control it becomes a quote unquote bad emotion. And so it's really not anger that's the problem. It's our inability to understand and control anger that's the problem. And bipolar disorder sort of adds a little wrinkle to that because it's very difficult to control the symptoms of bipolar anyways. It kind of messes with your emotions and you lose the ability to control them. Anger is one of those things. Mm-hmm. So just in the same way as depression, mania, there's just anger. So anger just takes on this, we can't control it. And then we just, it's not good. It can be dangerous. It can be violent. It's not often violent, but it's, I don't think that not often is all that reassuring if you've got somebody screaming at you.
Yeah.
And arguably yelling is its own type of violence. So it gets really, really tricky.
Yeah. Yelling, putting people down, common traits, when I'm anger or when I have anger, it usually comes with blame, right?
Right.
That's a typical double-edged sword. And blame is, as one of my favorites, Brene Brown says, is just the letting go of uncomfortability and unknown of how to treat something. So that's what blame is, and it's not good because it pushes things away, and it's something we should work on. But truly, when I'm not angry is when I try to explain to people this is what happens. If I'm in this situation, I get angry, and the anger is anxiety anger, not me anger. And that's not an excuse. Again, I agree with you. We're not here to make excuses like, oh, I get to punch people when I'm anxious. No, that's not right. Or I get to be like this. I work every day, and every time I get into that situation to be less and less angry. But it's also habitual, right? Like before I knew what was causing it, I had been doing it. So I'm 40 years into doing it.
Wow.
It's not gonna change tomorrow. I mean, that's just not gonna happen. It's a habitual problem that I'll be working on.
Yeah, and there's things that you have to learn along the way. This is probably my favorite story to tell about anger. When I was younger, and when I say younger, I mean 12 to 21. We'll go 12 to 21. Whenever I would get angry, I would punch things and inanimate things. I want to be very, 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 very clear that they are things, never people. Always things. But, I would get angry and I would kick something, or I'd smack the wall, or I'd punch my bed, or I'd, just kick something that was on the ground. And I was thinking that this is a good way to get out my anger. I felt better when I kicked something. And then, eventually I got married, and one day I got mad and I was yelling and I kicked a clothes basket, and it terrified my wife. Yeah. And I was confused. I was like, I've been kicking things in front of people for 10 years. And she said, the very clear indication is that you can't control yourself, and you're starting with that inanimate object before you get to me.
Yeah.
And I was like, I did not mean that at all. But she was right. I'm a big guy. I'm 6'3", 275 pounds. And while yelling and visibly upset and angry, I kicked something. A reasonable person should be afraid of that. And I didn't even see it through her eyes. So, I stopped that behavior immediately, just immediately. I did not realize that was the vibe I was giving off. And I think that's what people need to realize. A lot of times people think that in their anger, they're doing something that helps them. And maybe it does. But you've got to be very careful about how the people around you are perceiving it, because they matter too. They matter a lot.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure we're both very lucky that we have women that have stayed with us. I've just finished 25 years of marriage, so I guess she's going to stay with me. But
well, sadly, mine moved on. But we're still besties. So her and I are still friends to this very, very day, which is a show for another time.
Yeah. But I think part of it is that people do stand by you, and again, friends and relationships are not necessarily destroyed if you can create understanding. And again, it doesn't make it better. When I react this way, I'm pretty much guaranteed a bad week of silence from my wife. But and maybe that's my healthy dessert. Maybe that's what I should get. And I do. I agree. It's like I was a jerk. And I get it. And right. I'm learning to try to walk away, and then that still makes people upset, but at least I'm walking away and not saying something out of control, right?
Sure.
So I think everybody can work on techniques, but let's talk about how you turned that corner. So you realized, okay, I have this illness, it's done all these things in my life, but now I'm not going to stay silent. I want to be an activist. I want mental illness to be something that I can discuss, that people can share, that we don't have to keep in a closet or in a secret anymore. What turned the corner for you? What made you decide that's what you're going to do?
Well, there's a couple of different things. It's a little bit of a meandering story as these things probably go for everybody. The first thing is after I was diagnosed, I really didn't have any shame about it. I mean, I was younger. I was bipolar most of my life, which comes with a lot of, grandiosity and feelings of invincibility anyways. And of course, anybody that's in their mid-20s feels invincible without bipolar disorder. I had a good job. I made good money. And when I got diagnosed, I just started telling people. It's like, hey, Gabe, you were off work for 6 weeks. What happened? Oh, I went to the psychiatric ward. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Yeah, I was pretty sick, thinking about suicide. And instantly, things kind of went to hell. I apologize for swearing on your show.
Oh, you're not swearing yet.
Things went to heck. Yeah, it did not turn out well for me. Within a little over a year, I was fired from that job. Things just people that allies for years, people that respected me for years, all of a sudden stopped talking to me. One person told me that I was scamming the company because if I really wanted to kill myself, I'd be dead. It's not that hard. It's clearly a lie. People just got downright hostile. So after I lost that job and got a little better, I got another job and I decided to keep my mouth shut at that job. I mean, I just didn't tell anybody, and that felt really crummy. I'm not gonna lie. It felt really, really, really bad. But I needed money. I needed health insurance. I had bills, so I did that for as long as I could. But then I got so sick I couldn't work. So I ended up unfortunately losing that job. And I quit that job. I wasn't, fired or anything. I just quit because I couldn't do it. And, then some time went by where, more therapy, more outpatient treatment, et cetera. And then, I finally got back to work in something that was a little more stable and something that I could do. But I still kept my mouth shut, and it still felt kind of bad. But I decided that the trade-off would be that I'd keep my mouth shut at work because I'm just there for money anyway. And I would volunteer for mental health charity. And that's what I did. My parents had found a mental health charity that was nationwide, and they live in Tennessee. So they said, hey, there might be a chapter in Columbus. Of course there was. And I just started volunteering there. And apparently I was good at it because they kept asking me to do more and more stuff. And I kept doing more and more stuff. And then I did more and more stuff and more and more stuff. And eventually one of the stuffs that I got to do was give a speech about my experience. This was the first time that I had spoke publicly about it. It was the first time that I'd really given a speech of that magnitude. There was over 100 people in the room, and I got a giant standing ovation. And to this day, I've only received 3 standing ovations. I've given lots and lots of speeches, 3. And so I got one on my very first try. So, and then it took like another 2 years to get another one. So I don't know what happened. Apparently I went backwards a little in my speaking abilities. But I caught the bug, and people kept asking me to do it. And it just really grew from there. I had no intentions. I did not start out trying to make this happen. I got really far in the process before I thought, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this professionally. I'm going to be a speaker, a writer, and an activist for a living. I'm going to do this full time, and I'm good at it. That took many years. It was part-time for a long time. But then eventually the scale sort of tipped, and I was able to build a career out of it, and here I am.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
you're like my hero. I'm 10 years into this, and I'm not even part-time yet.
You just never know where you're going to end up. And people ask me all the time, how can I do this full time? And the answer is, I don't know. I really, really don't know. I think that there are parts of this that's luck.
Yeah, there's luck and passion. I think those are,
luck, passion, and perseverance.
Yeah, if someone had told me, where I was going to go with this and that, I was bullied in Lexington, Massachusetts, and so sort of probably a little like you starting out. I just wanted to get these stories out of my mind. I just, so blogs came along, and I'm like, hey, yeah, I'm good on the web. I'm going to blog my stories out there, and lo and behold, all these people started sending me their stories. Can you put this on your site? Because it was a site called Bullying Stories, and the weird point came when the students or the people in Lexington who I would have graduated with, but I had moved before that, had their 25th high school reunion. And we're talking about this guy that is sitting there writing about all the bullies in Lexington and that they all experienced. And so all these people went to my site and saw their stories, or my stories, and some of them involved them. And next thing I knew, I was getting bombarded. It's just like, what? Like, I just wrote this little thing for me. And you find out it's getting, you're making an impact. And I think that's when I know for me it turned the corner, and I said, well, I'll keep trying to make that impact. So now you're with Psych Central. That's, I know, one of your jobs, and doing a podcast called the Psych Central Show, writing. So how did that come about? How did you get to that point?
Well, I started off just like you. I started off writing. I have a joke that says everybody who's diagnosed with mental illness is prescribed a blog. I really think that's true, and I think it's true for a lot of reasons. But the biggest one is because it really is cathartic. I mean, it has even if your blog is read by nobody, still do it. Please do it. It's. And when I first started, I'm sure that my blogs were read by nobody because they were terrible, but I loved them and I loved doing it. And I sort of grew it from there. I started off, I was obviously just writing for my own site. Eventually, I applied for a blogging job at another site. While I was blogging for that site, I won an award. Best blog. I met a lot of great people, and I really honed my skills. So by this point, I'd been blogging for 4 years, and I won an award, and that caught the eye of Psych Central. Psych Central and I got together, and they were just like, hey, do you want your own blog? And I was like, I do want my own blog. And ta-da, here I have a blog. And, but now the blog, instead of being on that site, it's now on this other site. And I kept blogging over there. And of course, the qualities got better and better, and my following got bigger and bigger. This caught the attention of Bipolar Magazine. Bipolar Magazine was like, hey, you're a pretty good writer and you have great insights. Do you want to write for us? And I said, well, I'm too stupid to say no. So yes. So next thing you know, I'm blogging over there, and then a bunch of other sites came a call in, and Gabe, do you want to blog for us? And I just kept saying yes and yes and yes and yes, and then one day I woke up and I'm like, oh my god, I write for like 35 sites, and so
I gotta write 5 articles today.
Yeah, I mean, it really became a lot. So what sort of happened was I started paring down, and I started paring down based on following and type of site, and I really started to focus my energies onto Psych Central. And this is the part where, I don't know if the gurus at Psych Central are listening, but Psych Central made an investment in me in a way that other sites didn't. All the sites, they all paid their bills. I wrote something, they paid me for what they write. Everybody lived up to their word. I don't have any stories of getting ripped off or lied to or anything like that, But Psych Central really respected what I did, and they gave me other opportunities, little side projects. And eventually one of the projects that came up was the podcast. They had never been in that space before. They respected my ability to never shut up about mental health, and that's what you need for a podcast. And we put together the show, and the show has gone to some amazing places. What started off as this tiny little podcast, it's now in the iTunes top 10 for the health category. It's being forwarded around. I heard tell of people burning it onto CDs and playing it in support groups. And we completely approve of that. That's wonderful. And people are talking about it and responding to it. And that's fantastic. And it makes me feel really, really good. So I really spend the majority of my time at Psych Central these days because, frankly, they made the biggest investment in me. They saw the most potential. And so they get me. I still hang out at Bipolar Magazine because, hey, I have bipolar and, it's a magazine. But I would say that the majority of the things that I do are for Psych Central because they gave me the biggest opportunity. And I'm very thankful for that. And again, I'm not getting paid to say that. Nobody over there is going to listen to this podcast probably. So, but if they do, thank you, Psych Central people, for believing in Gabe and for putting up with me. It's been great.
Not just that, but like I said at the beginning, I mean, when I found Psych Central, it's my go-to place. It's one of the places that, when I need information, when I'm looking for good quality information, I'm not getting paid either. So, but that's, obviously that's how I met you, and I'm so glad I did. Because you're amazing. What you're doing is really amazing, and it's what I talk about all the time. The conversation can be open, and we don't have to hide, and there's no embarrassment. Like I'm not embarrassed. I'm not, all these people when I publish my memoir, oh, he's so brave. I don't feel brave. I feel released. I don't know how else to say it. It's like it was a cathartic release, and I did it, and people have responded to it, just as I'm sure they have with you. And there's just nothing more satisfying when you feel like you lived all this time trapped in a bubble to actually burst it, and then help other people burst their bubble and allow themselves to be free again, because we're just human.
Yeah.
We're not sick. We're just human.
and what's fascinating to me is not everybody wants to do this. I talk to many, many people, as I'm sure you do, and every other mental health advocate, that they're just like, look, I don't want to be a mental health advocate. I don't want to be a writer. I don't want to be a speaker. Mm-hmm. I don't want to inspire people. I want to be an accountant. I want to go to work, raise my family, or go to work and meet a nice person, or take care of my dog, or own turtles, whatever. They're just like, I want this illness to impact my life as little as possible, and that's all I need. And I really love those folks because they just really teach me that, at the end of the day, my job is mental health advocate, podcaster, speaker, writer, but really, I enjoy it so much. So it's not really the advocacy that I'm in it for. I'm in it because I like it, and because I'm good at it, and because, I get to hug a lot of people. So while I didn't want to be an accountant, I did want to have a job that I liked, where I felt fulfilled, and I got it. It just happened to be in this arena, but everybody else, their arenas are different. Accountants, swimming coaches, teachers, whatever. We need them all. So I'm glad that those folks are out there, so that I don't take life too seriously.
Well, and there are only so many people that can speak and want to. I have many people that ask to be anonymous, but they want to write something. I'm like, great. That's where I started. My name wasn't on anything I wrote at the beginning. No way, And then when I finally said, you know what, I'm not going to be authentic if I don't have my name on this. And I've been very lucky, to be embraced for it for the most part. And the people that don't embrace me, I don't worry about anymore. That's not the people I want to be hanging out with anyway. So sorry we have to wrap up. But I have a question I like to ask all my guests at the end, and everybody's got such interesting answers. So, when you think back to how you were before and how you are today, or maybe even more recently, what changes have you made in your life to live a happier and healthier life today?
Oh man, that's a question, isn't it? What changes have I made in my life to be healthier and happier? See, I did that thing where I repeat the question to give me time to think about it. Yeah.
And you can just come up with one. I don't need like 20.
I have to say, there's a lot. I mean, you have to make a lot of changes to go from somebody living with untreated bipolar disorder to somebody who is in control of bipolar disorder. So there's a ton of changes that have to be made. I mean, I really needed to learn a lot of coping skills and learn a lot about myself. So if I had to boil that all down to like one, and the biggest one, it was to be open to change. Mm-hmm. And that was really hard because, one, I was young, and I was 25 years old when I was diagnosed, and 25-year-olds, we're not known for being the most flexible people. And I had to give up a lot of agency. I had to accept being in the locked room. I had to accept listening to doctors tell me that I was thinking about things wrong, and I had to get in touch with my emotions, which I like to consider myself a non-stereotypical male, but when somebody's telling me to get in touch with my emotions and hug my inner child, some of that maleness comes out to say, no. But they were right. I needed to face the things that happened to me in my past. I needed to accept that the way that I saw things were not the way that things happened. I needed to be willing to try different things so that I could find the things that worked to lead to the life that I wanted. And I had to be really, really open to change at a time in my life when I really didn't want to be. And that made it probably made all the difference. It really made all the difference. But if it didn't make all of it, it was definitely the biggest contributor. Because, man, some of the things I tried, pardon the pun, were nuts. I mean, I was like, this, and some of the things didn't work for me. I'll be quite honest. I tried things and I was right. They were nuts for me, but I still tried it. I gave it I was respectful enough of the process to try and be honest about whether or not it worked. And so many things that I thought were stupid, I still do to this day. And so many things that I thought were great, I stopped doing because they were hurting me in ways that I wasn't even aware of. So it was such a huge learning process. That's the longest answer ever for being open to change.
That's great. No, I think you're onto something. And actually, I'm kind of going through it right now on Monday, I started a diet, right? And you go, well, so what? Well, it's a certain diet. It's not like, it's a weird diet. It's like the Mayo Clinic diet, which is just eat better foods. And it's really, again, it goes back into what you probably know and maybe even have written about. What you put in your body affects how you're going to be emotionally as well.
Yeah.
And so my diet is showing me that some of these things that I'm eating that I never would have eaten. I mean, if you had asked me a year ago, I wouldn't have touched it. Do have an effect and are proven to, help your mind and be a little better and your body and again, maybe some of it's placebo effect because you read it and you say, oh well. So either way, it's good, but diet is my new sort of thing. So how can people get in touch with you, read what you're doing, hear your podcast?
There is a ton of ways to get in touch with me. The quickest and easiest to remember is my name, GabeHoward.com. It's just GabeHoward.com. I mean, it can't get more basic than that. If you want to check out the Psych Central Show, the podcast that I host, it is psychcentral.com/show. And of course, you should also check out psychcentral.com. I think we've spoken really highly of it, and I mean it. It's a good site for many, many reasons, but the biggest thing that I like about it is that it really covers everything. It has articles written by researchers, doctors, etc. So if you need legitimate researched information that you can trust about mental health issues, it's on there. But if you want to read about lived experience, read about, how people like me, I'm not a doctor. This is just how I feel about it. That's on there too. There's videos, support groups. There's just a ton of stuff on there. But for Gabe specific stuff, psychcentral.com/show is the podcast and GabeHoward.com is me. And of course, you can also like me on Facebook, which you can find from, shocker, GabeHoward.com.
and of course, one of the things about that you and I both know, and again, I'm not being paid, you're being paid, but there's a lot of sites out there that talk about psychiatric issues, and probably like you when you were in your discovery mode, I was the same way. I mean, I went to all of them. And then you really start to figure out which ones have the good information, which ones are really helpful. Psych Central, I think, is one of them. So that's why I'm so glad you came on the show today, because I love that. I love that you come from there and that you're this person who is so honest about mental illness and how it's just our lives. It's not who we are. It's just part of our lives. And I appreciate that, Gabe. And thank you for being on Healthy You today.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me, and anytime.
So this is Alan Eisenberg with Healthy You. Please join us next time.
Thank you for listening to Healthy University, brought to you by Bullying Recovery, LLC. This podcast does not replace the need for medical advice, professional diagnosis, opinion, treatment, or services to you or any other individual. The information provided here or through linkages to other sites is not a substitute for medical or professional care, and you should not use the information in place of a visit, call, consultation, or the advice of your physician or other healthcare provider. Join us next time for more Healthy University.